Okay, welcome class to today's session on climate change and its impact. And we'll be talking about some direct and indirect impacts of climate change. So before we begin, let's revise that climate change is now happening all over the world. We have we are observing some effects or impacts on the environment, like and the ecosystems, and as well as the communities. So it is the climate change is just it more complex than just rising temperatures only. Although climate change or global warming, as some scientists used to call it, have you now used the term climate change, which describes the complex shifts in the planet's weather and climate systems. And it just not just so climate change does not only include the rising average temperatures, but also extreme weather events like cold waves as well, shifting wildlife population and habitats, rising sea levels, and range of many other impacts. So it's more complex than just climbing temperatures. The impacts of climate change are happening right now. These impacts extend beyond an increase in temperature, affecting ecosystems and the communities around the world. It is also affecting the things on which we depend, like water, energy, transportation, agriculture, food, and even human health. All of these sectors are experiencing the effects of changing climate. And has been well established now by the scientists that human induced climate change had a significant impact on this changing climate. And scientists have very high confidence that these global temperature will continue to rise for decades to come, largely due to the greenhouse gases produced due to the human activities. But according to IPCC, Environmental Panel of Climate Change, the extent of climate change on individual reason will vary over time, and it will primarily depend upon the societal or environmental systems to mitigate or adapt to that change. Over the years, we have observed that there has been an increase of number of weather related or hydrometeorological extreme events happening in the world. We have observed an increasing number of deaths, increasing number of economic damages, and even to the impact to the infrastructure. So it has been increasing over time. So now, depending upon different impacts of climate change, first we need to understand how much is the evidence regarding certain disasters or certain increase in temperatures in various locations all over the world. So primarily the confidence level of climate change certainty is based on two things: the evidence or the data available, how limited it is, how much data we have, how much robust data we have, and then agreement by the international experts, how much they agree upon the data, how much a model is sophisticated. So based on such agreement, the scientist or IPCC, they say that how much the estimated projections for climate change scenario is possible basically. So but climate change or climate projections are not tied to just observation. It is basically response of a climate system to hypothetical but very much plausible scenarios which govern how external factors are affecting climate change in the near or far future. So, how do they determine the likelihood or the certainty regarding certain climate projections? Well, it all depends upon the observed trends, the process of understanding some climate ensemble models, and evaluation of those models and downscaling of such climate system to some local areas or regional areas. So, using these different lines of evidence, they consider confidence in certain climate projection. So, what are they agreeing upon? So, it is estimated by the IPCC that how much trend will change. For example, here there is, in terms of likelihood, very high likelihood. In terms of spatial scale in temperature, the future change is happening in temperature. It is very high. Reliability or you can say probability is very high. Similarly, depending upon at village level, city level, or national level, depending upon the different spatial scale and the temporal scales, your confidence or reliability on project on climate projection, they will vary. Now, in terms of IPCC reports that at a global scale, it is with very high confidence and it is very likely that there will be extreme temperatures, meaning like heat waves as well as cold waves. But there is a medium confidence, but it is very likely that more extreme rainfall will happen. Similarly, with medium confidence and to some likeness, likely it is likely that drought will also happen. It is very likely that sea level is climate change is contributing towards the increasing sea level rises, and we have some low confidence regarding influence of climate change on cyclones or hurricanes or the change on frequencies. But that is probably due to the incomplete data or understanding how cyclones form or the physics of uh, this geophysics of creation of these cyclones. For now, we have low confidence, but it is also uh, agreed upon that some one way or another climate change is impacting the severity of such hydrometeorological extreme events. In terms of Asia, so if we talk about Pakistan, for example, Pakistan is in South Asia, so it is likely that we will have a temperature which is above global mean. Precipitation in South Asia, it is likely that it will increase similarly in the winter and the summer as well. So depending upon area or your locality or your region, your probability of certain climate projection will vary, especially. And with time, maybe with more data, we'll be more confident on such probabilities. Similarly, again from another point of view, uh, what sort of key risks are in happening in Asia, in the continent? So increased riverine and coastal and urban flooding will happen, and it will cause damages to your livelihoods and settlements. So with medium confidence, we are saying that floods will happen, and with very high confidence, we are saying risk of heat related deaths will increase. And with high confidence, we can say the drought related and water and food shortages will happen in Asia in the long term or near term, depending on the temporal scale. We are very much highly confident that this will happen if the trend of climate change continues as it is happening. So one of the main direct impact of climate change is increasing temperature. And that rising of temperature will affect wildlife, human life, even and how their habitats or ecosystems adapt to it. So vanishing ice due to rising of temperature has challenged species to migrate from one place to another. So their wildlife or migration patterns have changed. And now these impacts of climate change or the rising temperature are not evenly spread around the world. And and it is highly doubtful that it will be evenly spread even in the future. So temperature will increase at different speeds everywhere, with generally it will be a more higher temperature on land than oceans. And these higher temperatures can be linked to almost most of the severe impacts like heat waves, widespread crop failures, dramatic shifts of dramatic shift of animal and plant ranges, and the most importantly, it will impact the most vulnerable with the people who have the fewest resources, options, or capacities. They will suffer the most. In some regions, global warming has already surpassed the 1.5 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial levels, and more than one-fifth of humans are already experiencing this type of temperature, 1.5 degree, in the last summer season. And it is also found to be this risk is found to be generally higher at the lower altitudes, latitudes, and for disadvantaged people and communities, especially these developing countries like Africa, Asia. These are very much at risk. And certainly, these rising temperature will also have health risks associated with it, like exhaustion, this heat stroke. It will also have impact on your cardiovascular diseases, your kidney, as well as increase in aggravated allergies. So it will also have kind of a health impact as well. Yes. So in Pakistan, it has been observed as well that our temperature trend has been changing in certain areas. Our mean temperature is going down, whereas in some places it is going up. So in Pakistan, we've been in the last 50 years we are experiencing a change in overall temperature. Now, the second most direct impact would be due to is the rising sea level, probably due to the increasing heat and the melting of ice in the Arctic region that is contributing towards an increasing sea level rises. So depending upon different scenarios or the representation of carbon, these pathways, we call it representation, concentration, representative concentration pathways of carbon emissions. So depending upon the scenario developed by the IPCC, we will observe a change in sea level rise by the next by 2100, that there will be an increase of sea level rise all over the world, and that would cause coastal floodings in many major cities of the world, where usually those cities are below the sea level, and this increasing sea level rise will ultimately cause coastal flooding in those areas. Next is the again, as we were talking about the temperature in land, the same higher ocean temperature will start happening at the same time, but not as much higher temperature as compared to land, but it will still there will be still temperature will be higher than usual, and what ultimately that would then disrupt the marine ecosystems, the coral reefs, the whole water ecosystem, in which all some of our industry is very much dependent on. And certainly these most of these species are at threat of disappearing or going extinct. Similarly, there is a debate, or there is an agreed confidence, high confidence, that there will be an increase in heavy rain and precipitation in the world. So it is found out using the data in the recent rains or precipitation data. It has been observed that on average, precipitation, rainfall, and snowfall has increased across the globe. And current climate models indicate that rising temperatures will continue to intensify the water cycle of the Earth, and this temperature will increase the evaporation rates, and increased evaporation will result in more frequent or intense storms or flooding events. But it will also contribute to the drying of some lands. The storm affected areas will experience an increase in precipitation and increased risk of flooding. But the areas which are away from these storms tracks will are likely to experience less precipitation, and then consequently an increased risk of drought. It is estimated that hurricanes and other related storms are likely to become stronger in the future. But consensus on temperature is very much robust and very high likely. But in terms of in terms of rainfall, ascertaining the impacts of rainfall at local level or a smaller scale is a bit tricky, because it is difficult to predict than simply some temperature, and scientists have some uh, you can say medium level of confidence with the rainfall. There is evidence that, of course, some regions will become more wetter, uh, and how much, that is very difficult to ascertain at a very local or small scale. It is likely that the warming up climate heavy rainfall will increase, but it might produce fewer intense events. But those events would be intense, like kind of these cyclones or hurricanes. But this could also lead to l- longer dry spells. So it goes both ways. So an increase or a decrease in precipitation will pose a threat to increase risk in of flooding, as well as increased risk of droughts. Similarly, in Pakistan, in the last 50 years, you have observed there is a change of trend in precipitation level in the country. So you can see there is some less rain than usual, and then in some places there is more rain than usual in the last 50 years. Now, another impact of climate change is your decrease or reducing ice covers or ice uh, snow covers in the earth poles. So it includes your mountain glaciers and ice sheets covering your Antarctica, Arctic region, and the Greenland. And IPCC report claims that with medium confidence that an increased level of warming between 1.5 and 2 degrees will cause an instability in the Antarctic ice, or can cause an irreversible loss of ice sheet of Greenland, and that could ultimately lead towards an increase of more than 6 feet sea level rise over a time scale of hundreds to thousand years. And it will all depend upon how much this ice, how quickly it melts. It is that report also estimates that if we even if we curb the carbon emission in the coming decades, and we achieve our goal of uh, limiting carbon emissions to pre-industrial level, around more than one third of the world's remaining glaciers will melt before 2100. And when it comes to the Arctic Circle or the North Pole, 95% of the oldest and thickest ice is already gone. So it is becoming very irreversible, this impact of climate change. Uh, Now, these melting of glacier will ultimately increase your sea level rise, and that will then in return increase your coastal erosion, can cause your storm surges, your coastal floodings, and will disturb the ocean temperatures. And that disturbance in ocean temperatures will then create intense storms like hurricanes and typhoons. So it has impact on that. Then later on, that will also these ocean currents will also disrupt your weather pattern. It will also disturb your fishery industries, and then obviously the coastal communities which are very much dependent upon this. sea, through trade and everything, these coastal communities will face danger or threat of coastal floodings and more frequent floodings or more intense storms, and these communities will be ultimately very much impacted due to this change in sea level rise. And that and this does not only impact human beings only. This melt of sea ice melt would likely endanger the penguins, some walruses, or different species, even polar bears, and that would cause migrating of these polar bears to maybe near human habitats to in search of food. So it will also have an impact on your ecosystem. Okay, so if we link our heat waves to the rising temperature, so there will be an increased number of heat wave events as well as wildfires, which can be linked to the climate change due to intense heat. So these heat waves or wildfire will ultimately uh, have an impact on your health, human health. So this I've already explained in the at rising temperature as well that certain health risks will be intensified due to such events. Okay, then again, that heat waves or the temperature disturbance that will also create or longer dry spells, and that will eventually convert into the drought conditions, and that will ultimately impact your agriculture or your water security and scarcity in the your areas. Okay, now let's talk about some indirect consequences. The first indirect consequences would be your disturbance in agriculture production and the yield, because your crop pattern and the time taken to produce a crop will change due to the changing weather, and then will ultimately cause food insecurity as well as water insecurities, because at some places there will be more rainfall than usual, and in some places there will be less rain than usual. So ultimately creating a risk of floods or droughts, and that will again link to, especially in terms of Pakistan or the developing countries, which are their economy is predominantly dependent on the agriculture. They will be very much impacted by the climate change. Again, coming back to the rising temperatures or the changing temperatures, those heat wave risks will increase, especially in the urban areas or the built up areas where naturally, due to the built environment or the grey or concrete infrastructure in a city, it absorbs heat, and those areas are usually at higher temperature than its surroundings. So, heat waves will intensify in urban areas, especially dense urban areas where there are less green spaces. So, there is an increasing risk to the urban citizens that will impact their daily life as well as their health. Similarly, the all these various impacts of hydrometeorological disasters like floods, hurricanes, cyclones, flooding or droughts, that would ultimately cause some kind of economic losses, some economic damages. It is also estimated that even, for example, there is a study in heat waves as well, that whenever there is a heat wave event or when there is a rising temperature in an area, their stock markets fall. So these extreme events would ultimately have economic impacts on various regions. So depending upon how much developing a country is, or the status of developing or is those countries will be severely impacted. Those vulnerable countries will be severely impacted. So they will face economic damages, and that might have repercussions on their planning and development in the long run. Another point is the ocean acidification. The more your ocean will become more acidic in nature, and that will again disturb the ecosystem of the water, or you can say the marine life. Another point is the that under indirect, because we have talked about some direct impacts, and in those direct impacts I've also talked about how much impact it will have on your habitat or your biodiversity or your ecosystem, and that will cause an extinction of certain species, and that will disrupt the natural uh, animal kingdom cycle of different areas in the world. And lastly, from social aspect of view or societal point of view, climate change will have an impact on your agriculture, your different development sectors, and every sector would need to be to be adapted to the climate change. So your agriculture practices, your green area management, your energy crisis or energy management, your infrastructure design, and your related economic activities like tourism, which are very much dependent on uh, many countries are basically very much dependent on tourism, that will be impacted severely. For example, in this COVID situation, lot of tourism have been affected all over the world. Countries like Thailand or some European countries, they have incurred huge losses in terms of tourism. They have similarly infrastructure that needs to be redesigned to be resilient or resistant to flood events. Similarly, agriculture needs to be resilient enough to tackle the changing climate. Similarly, society by itself, they need to adapt to these climate change impacts. So in the long run, adaptability is the only option if we are going to live with the new normal. So that brings us to another question, that what we at an individual level can do about climate change. So firstly, the first problem is, or the first issue is to accept that climate change is happening and confront our local leaders or government officials and politicians to limit carbon emissions in the country. So that will ultimately lead towards sustainability or reduced impacts of climate change. So we must start mitigating climate change. Then reduce use of electricity or shifting towards more renewable energy sources, that we can do, and invest in more energy efficient, thus investing in more energy efficient appliances. We should reduce food waste, as well as efficiently use the water. We should not waste the water, and that would save ourselves from the water crisis, which is looming in the next 50 years. And then we should try to reduce, reuse, and recycle, and shrink your carbon footprint in the environment. So that is another way of tackling climate change at an individual level. We should then start planting trees that are known to reduce carbon dioxide, or at least reduce the impacts of rising temperatures in your area, and try to shift your habits of traveling, and we can shift from uh, more walkability towards more walkability or biking, and giving up this transportation which uses petroleum, and that would ultimately leads to a less reduction. But these are more habits you can easily adopt. You just open yourself to the change and adapt your lifestyle so you can have minimum imprint or minimum impact of your life towards the carbon emissions. So it is encouraged that you should plant trees. So in the last slide, I'll leave you to this, that maybe some of you would start adopting more climate change or environmental friendly habits in your life. Thank you.